Welcome to today's CI Tools webinar. My name is Josh Osborne and I'm the Product Manager for the CI Tools here at Central Innovation. And this is a weekly webinar where we talk about stuff to do with the CI Tools. Apologies that I haven't been doing this for the last few weeks. I've been sick, as you can probably tell by my voice. But hopefully you should be able to tell what I'm saying this week. We are going to have a look at the electrical tool this week. So as we've been going through with all of the other tools over the last few months, we're going to be looking at the electrical tool for a beginner. So if you've never picked up the electrical tool, why you might want to use it and how you can get started using it as well. Before we get underway though, just a couple of things to cover off. If you have any questions as we're going through the session, just enter those in the chat panel or the Q&A panel, either on Vimeo or YouTube, wherever you're watching this, and I will check in on those questions as I'm finishing up the session and see if there's anything that I can answer live. So if you've got anything you want to find out, whether it's about the electrical tool or about some other tool, or maybe not even about the tools at all, I might be able to help still if it's just a ArchiCAD query. Just send those through to the chat panel and I'll see what I can do. If I can't help you online, I'll create a support ticket for you and follow up later as well. On that note, also, if you have any suggestions for future webinar topics, please also send those through as well, just either via the chat panel or the Q&A panel, or if you think of anything after the fact, send it through as a support ticket to our support desk and that'll make its way through to me. We are just about through all of the list of tools, I think, that we've been doing for the last few months. So once we get to the end of that, I will start going through some more specific queries and how-tos that we've gotten from customers. So if you have anything like that, please send it through. All right, but with that out of the way, let's look at the electrical tool. So I'm going to be using ArchiCAD 28 today. Most of the functionality of the electrical tool is the same in previous versions, so if you are using an older version, you'll still be able to do most of what you're going to see today. Before we get started, I'm just going to quickly check and see if there's any questions come through because of the screen share or anything like that. So just a moment. Okay, that looks all right. So the electrical tool is a tool, part of the CI tools, which is for doing electrical work, obviously. You can probably guess by the name. And it appears in your toolbox here, just below the object tool in my work environment. And it looks like a symbol of a switch plate. And what we're going to do with the tool is that it will allow us to place down symbols for all of the electrical items that we want to draw up in our project, and then we can create wiring diagrams using those symbols. So it will allow us to connect up multiple symbols or connect other objects or lamps with the symbols that we've placed to create a wiring diagram that we can use in our project. The different symbols are very configurable, so we'll look into how we can change those and what the options are. And they also have accompanying wall plates in 3D, so that means that in your elevation views and 3D views, you will also be able to see a representation of the electrical symbols that you're placing. So you don't have to place a symbol somewhere in 2D and then also find a matching 3D symbol. Everything displays in both 2D and 3D using symbolic views and wall plates for 3D. So they just stay together. You don't have to worry about placing multiple different pieces. So accessing the electrical tool, again from this option in the toolbox. If you are using the electrical tool for the first time and you don't see this in your toolbox, it just is because it hasn't been added to your toolbox. It doesn't show up automatically, unfortunately. You can add it manually to your toolbox by editing your work environment, or you can just apply the CI tools work environment, which is installed when you install the tools, and then just apply that by going to the options menu, work environment, apply profile, and in ArchiCAD 28 it's called the CI Tools Profile 28, and in whatever version you're in, it'll be called CI Tools, or if you're on a really old version, CAD Image Tools profile, whatever version is, and when you choose that, it will apply that. And that will make this show up in your toolbox there. So I'm going to double click on that to open it up, and we can start browsing through what is available. So at the top level in our electrical folder, we have 5 subfolders. As of a update that we did just a few weeks ago now, we have added the folder called IND RSA. So this adds in the addition of India and South Africa compatible symbols and wall plates, and that joins the existing list that we have of the EU plates, New Zealand and Australia, UK and US. So that should cover you off for pretty much anywhere you are now, I think. If you are from a country where you don't use any of these plates, I would be interested to hear from you though, and we can look into building in additional ones. But for now, these are the ones that are available. I'm going to go with NZAUS because that's what I know. And in there, you'll see we have a further series of subfolders. So we have switches at the top, power outlets, jack points, and mixed modules. So the switches contain switches, obviously. In this case, common switches, which is just a standard switch plate for us. Special switches, which is the slightly more unusual switches, and mixed switches, which is a single object that allows you to put in a mixture of switch types into a single symbol and plate. Power outlets works in a similar way. So we have common power outlets, which has a standard AUNZ GPO, as well as some permanent connection and RCD connection there. And then a mixed power outlet works similarly to the mixed switch in that it will let us create and modify a sort of mixture of different types of power outlets in a single symbol and plate. Jack points again work in a similar way. The common jack points have a couple of common jack point types, and the special ones have a couple more that are a bit more obscure maybe. And then the mixed jack points let us mix and match those. And finally, the mixed modules is a module that allows us to mix and match any combination of the above types into one symbol and plate. So whatever combination or variation of these you are looking for, just go for the folder that closest fits it, and then choose the type that you need. If you're going to create custom types of symbols and plates, then you can use any of these as well, and we'll look at applying a custom symbol if we have time today. I'm going to start off with a common switch though, so I'm going to choose the AUNZ switch, and you'll see in my preview what it will look like in the floor plan when I place it. So it's got a standard AUNZ switch symbol here, and then it has the text 1200 sitting on it, and this is just a label displaying the elevation of the plate. So you can see in my settings here that we have some dimensional settings for the plate itself, the height, width and depth of the plate, and then the D value, which is the elevation to the top of the plate, and that's what's showing here. And we can control where that dimension goes to. So at the moment it's dimension to the top, but if you want to dimension to the middle or to the base instead, you can change that there. We also have the option to rotate the plate. So if I look in 3D, you'll see that it's a kind of a portrait plate with a single switch. Clicking this button will rotate that, so we have a kind of a landscape plate instead with that single switch in it still. So that allows you to just easily toggle them. Essentially what it's doing is just changing the A and B values to be the opposites of each other. So you can see that happening there, and you could manually do this yourself if you wanted to as well, obviously, by entering whatever value you need. Below that we have the angle of the plate, so as it says in the brackets here, if we set it to 0 degrees it will just be floor mounted, so it will drop back so that it is sort of facing upwards, but by default 90 degrees is what you will have in almost all cases to place on a wall. And then we've got the number of actual switches that are in the plate, so you can see the number of switches is 1, and then the number of rows is also 1. If I change the number of switches to 3 here, you'll see we get 3 switches placed here, and they're in a single row. If I change this to have 2 rows, you we'll see that we now have 2 rows of switches with the amount of switches that are contained split across those here. So our 3 switches display that way. So this will allow you to set up the grid of switches that you want to display in your plate. I think I'll go with 2 for this one, and we'll keep it in 2 rows so that they are above each other for now. Over on the right we have some additional settings for whether you want the plate to be blank or if it's a neon switch, as well as controls for the way that it displays. Moving on from the plate, we can look at the switches page, and this will allow us to further define the switches that are part of our plate. So if I go back to my symbol view here, we can see that there's been a slight change since we looked at it last, and that is that we have a 2 showing on here now because we have 2 switches in this symbol instead of just 1. And you can see we have the controls here. These are the same as what we set before, so the number of switches and the rows, but we also have an additional setting to control the spacing between the switches, so you can modify that if you need to. And then over on the right we can control each of the switches. So at the top we have this drop down here defining the 2 switches. This will be as long as however many switches you have. So if you have 6 switches, there'll be 6 options here, but for us we've just got 1 and 2, and we can select one of them and choose the wiring and polarity for that switch. So 1, 2 or 3 pole, and 1, 2 or 1 or 2 way or intermediate for those. So if I come in here and I change one of the switches to a 2 pole, you will see that because we now have 2 different symbols because of the second pole and the first switch, it breaks those symbols out. So we have 2 symbols now displaying 2 different things. If I go back and change this back, it'll merge back in again. And changing the ways, I guess, of the switch will not change the symbol because they show the same in this case. Once we do some wiring, that may change if we add in multiple switches. So we can control all of that here. And again, these are just settings for switches because that's what we're looking at the moment, but we'll have a look at power outlets and jack points later, and they work in a similar way. The next setting is the symbol. This will allow us to control the symbolic display. At the moment we are using the model view options to define the layout, and then we are setting the switch to be the standard New Zealand type switch, but we have another option here that you can use, as well as an option to change the shape of the symbol as well if you need to do that. And then you can define the size here and choose to show arms if you want it to have those or not here as well. And then over on the right, again, similar to what we did before, we can define the specifics of each part of the switch. So in this case we've got our 2 switches again, and we can control how one of them looks and make it look different to the others if you want, or something like that. So we could say that the second switch, for instance, should use a custom symbol. We don't have any of those at the moment, so nothing shows here, but when we create one of those, that will be an option there. Moving on to the label, that is this number here that you're seeing, the 1200. It's controlled by the model view options at the moment, but if we override that, you can see what we can do here. So we can choose how many items to show on the label and then what to show on each. So this one is giving us 2 items now, and we can say the current rating and the elevation, for instance. And we can put pieces of text before, in between, and after those as well. And on the right here just controls the settings for that label, so the positioning of it and the font type and color and that sort of thing. Attributes, again, will just let us control the attributes, pretty straightforward. And the product data lets us define additional product data that you might have. So you might want to list the manufacturer of this particular switch or plate, and things like that. We also have a couple of fields that are used internally by the tool for scheduling, which we probably won't have time to get to today, but if we do, these are used internally to define what this switch is made up of, so that it knows how to break the switch out to show different switches when they contain different parts. So you can override this if you want to, but in most cases leaving it at the default is what you'll want, and then we will put it into our schedule and group based on it, but have it hidden because there's not really any reason to see it. And then below that we have a sort of a text-based description of the same, so it describes what we have in this particular switch. And then the rest of these are just text fields that you can modify to display whatever you need. So once we've selected the type of switch that we want and set the settings the way that we want, we can go ahead and place it. So in our project, we're just going to go to the view that we want to place it in, and then holding down the space bar, click on our wall, and this will automatically snap and rotate the switch to the wall that we click on when we do that. So it makes it nice and easy to manipulate. You don't have to mess around with placing a switch and then rotating it and then moving it and that sort of thing. Just makes it nice and quick and easy to place. And now we have 4 switches placed down, and we can go through and grab some more things as well. So let's have a look at power outlet. I won't go through all of the settings in detail here because it works very similarly. We've got 2 power outlets in a single row at the moment, which you can see there. If I go into the PowerPoints, you can control the settings as before. So PowerPoint switch above is set to switch above. We can set it to beside or no switch. And the jack points work in a similar way. So if we grab let's say a data jack point, you can see we have 1 of these showing at the moment, and then if we go to the controls, we can also define the layout there. There's not additional options for these because they are essentially specific for each type of jack point they are. And the symbolic view works the same way as before though, so we can override the type of symbol that is used and the size of it and that sort of thing. So using a variety of these types of things, we can set up all of the symbols and plates that we want, and then the mixed module option will allow us to essentially do whatever we like. So the plate settings are the same as before, but when I come to modules here, we have a lot more control over what each thing does. So at the moment we have 2 modules. One is a switch and one is a data jack point, which you can see there, and we can define those. So we can select the data jack point and change it to be a power point, which has a permanent connection and a switch beside, and that places that there. And we still have our regular switch above it, and we can make whatever changes we need to there. And again, the symbolic view will reflect any changes we make there. So I'll go through and place one of these as well. So again, just spacebar clicking on a wall, and it automatically snaps and rotates to it. And now we can create some wiring. Actually, before we create wiring, I'll just show you it in 3D. So if I go to 3D here, we'll be able to see those, I think in here. Yeah, so you can see one of them here. So this is one of the switches that we placed. It has a 3D representation of a plate with some switches on it. There's not a large amount of detail. These aren't intended to be used for highly detailed renders of your plates or anything. These are representative so that you can see where they are on the wall and what elevation they're at, and so that they show in your elevation views. So you can see that there, and the other ones that we placed will be around as well. There's another one over there. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a circuit. So the way that it works is that we can select any electrical elements, any objects, and any lamps to create a circuit. So I'm just going to grab the object tool, and we'll grab a blender. Just place this down. It can be any object at all. You don't have to choose something electrical even. And if you're wiring up, say, some light fixtures that you have downloaded or something like that, so long as they are presented as either objects or lamps inside ArchiCAD, that will allow you to include them in a circuit. So we select all of the pieces that we want to be part of the circuit, and then just go to CI Tools, Electrical, and choose to add wiring. This will give us a couple of options here. So we can choose if we want the pathing to be automatic or manual, and if we want the wires to be bent, and if so, how much. So we're choosing automatic here, and you'll see how that looks, and then we can define the line that's used and the layer that this will go onto, and hit OK, and it will just draw up a circuit for us. So you can see it's drawing circuit wiring between all of the elements that were selected, and now they all are part of this circuit. So if we select any item that is in the circuit and move it around, the wiring will maintain its connection to those elements. So it makes it nice and quick and easy to continue to work with your wiring. You don't have to redo anything. And if you've made changes to the wiring, so for instance, if you change the curve on one of them so that it goes around something in particular, when you move the elements, it will try to preserve those changes that you've made, so you're not going to have to redraw everything. If you redrew the wiring to make it more visible in some way, it will continue to work fine with what you're doing there. So that is the basics of using the electrical tool. Before we finish up, I'm just going to quickly also make a custom symbol so that you can see how to do that as well. So if the symbol type that you need is not available in the list of symbols that we have there, we can draw our own. So I'm just going to grab the polyline tool and draw up a shape. Actually, that's a spline, sorry. Polyline is what I want. So we'll grab that. We'll just draw a shape here, and then we will select this and go to File, Libraries and Objects, Save Selection As, and you will see the CI electrical symbol is one of the options available here. We'll just select that, and then we just need to give it a name. So I'll call it Test1 for now. Save that. It's going to save to the embedded library. And now if I go back to one of my switches here, we can go into the settings for that symbol and say that instead of using the default symbol, we want to use Test1, and any other custom symbols that you've saved will show up in here as well. Select Test1, and now it places that custom symbol excuse me places that custom symbol that we just made. Excuse me. So that's how you can achieve custom symbols, and you can use those for all of the different types of electrical symbols there. So that is the basics of the electrical tool. Probably the next thing you want to do is create a schedule, which is pretty straightforward to do. So we'll look at that